Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the nice introduction. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here and to share with you some reflections from what, in the 40 years that I've been working as a family doctor, I have been able to experience, and I wrote it down in a book. And in that book, there is a chapter number 2, dealing with social determinants and diversity. And every chapter starts with a patient's story. So let's go with that. Doctor, you should come immediately for a severely ill child. At the indicated address, in a room in the basement of a building with 3 apartments, I find a lady desperately looking at me and holding a 2.5-year-old child that is clearly unconscious. The child does not react when I call his name. The mother tells, yesterday, Rocky, what was the name of the child, had a fever. Overnight, the situation worsened. At first, he was vomiting, but then his reactions became increasingly poorer. Rocky never had serious health problems before. A quick control of the vital signs, unconscious, heart rate and respiratory rate very high, low blood pressure. I also noticed a generalized rash. Undoubtedly, this child was severely ill. I called an ambulance and contacted the hospital in order to prepare for intensive care. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics provided oxygen and an intravenous line and transferred Rocky to the hospital. I was sitting with the mother and started exploring the context of the child to find any explanation for Rocky's condition. Rocky's mother told me that she was currently ill and that Rocky's father disappeared a year ago. It was difficult for her to take care of Rocky as she was illiterate. She lacked knowledge about how to reach preventive medical and social services. When I visited the pediatric intensive care 2 days later, I was happy to see that Rocky was recovering from severe complicated meningitis. The pediatricians discovered that Rocky did not recognize the taste of water, as he mainly was drinking cola and eating chips at home. We were concerned about appropriate home care, and with the hospital staff, we decided to prolong the stay. The nurse and the social worker of the community health center visited Rocky's mother intensively in order to assess the possibilities to create the appropriate conditions for Rocky to return home. However, as so many barriers were encountered, the difficult decision was taken to look for a foster home to raise the child, but with maximal involvement of the mother. She participated in all major decisions regarding Rocky's schooling, health, and welfare. The social worker of the community health center took the role of case manager, coordinating the different steps in the care for Rocky. The physical condition of the mother worsened, and she died when Rocky was 12 years old. Rocky was doing very well at school and was able to find a job in the business of the foster family. At the age of 21, Rocky invited the social worker and me to be present at his wedding ceremony, and later 3 children were born. Although Rocky's start in life was not at all promising, thanks to cooperation between the different actors, the social determinants of Rocky's life were changed in a way that he could develop his capabilities and build a future. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a story early in my career as a GP, and I took this story because, it illustrates that even in one generation, you can close the gap. When you have an interprofessional approach to the problem, you look at the determinants of health, and you try to find better ways. Of course, it is an exceptional story, and Graham Watt was so much motivated to write a short reflection on that, but in order to read that, you have to look at the book. That was the story of the social determinants, and that's the challenges we are faced with in our daily practices. And I know that much of the people here in this audience have met Rockies in their career, early or later. That's the reality of today. Society is changing, we are facing new challenges, and I was asked to look what the word social medicine could mean in the context of the future challenges from a GP's perspective. And there are a lot of challenges. Increasing inequity. The percentage of children born in Belgium in poverty is increasing every year. We have the new phenomenon of the working poor. In France and in the south of Belgium, the Gilets jaunes give voice to their unwell feelings, to the fact that they don't feel integrated, that they don't feel heard in their needs. Individualization increases the vulnerability of a lot of people. On the other hand, we have signs all over the place of decreasing solidarity in a more and more multicultural society with all the tensions that this entails. The market forces in healthcare become stronger and stronger. And yesterday, for the 6th time every week in my country, 10,000 to 30,000 young people, scholars and students, go to the manifestations in Brussels, in other cities, to give voice to their anxiety about the future development of the climate. There is uncertainty, there are intergenerational tensions, because the young generation asks, why did you do not the things you should have be doing? And last but not least, more and more people feel humiliated. In his book, The Age of Anger, A History of the Present, Pankaj Mishra describes very clearly what many people today feel. He writes, never have so many free individuals felt so helpless, so desperate to take back control from anyone they can blame for their feeling of having lost it. The ideals of modern democracy, the equality of social conditions and individual empowerment have never been more popular, but they have become more and more difficult, if not impossible, to actually realize in the grotesquely unequal societies created by our brand of globalized capitalism. And that means, ladies and gentlemen, that whatever statistic I take, be it of 1919, 2000, 2010, 2020, the figures are unfortunately the same. Healthy life expectancy in Belgium for men at the age of 25 years demonstrates a gap of 18 years between those who have basic education and those with a higher education or university degree. And there is no change in the last 30 years. So as general practitioners, we are faced with this challenge. And at a certain moment, I was asked by Wonka Word to represent the discipline of general practice in the knowledge network on health system to make clear what primary care and family medicine and general practice could do in order to address the social determinants of health. So I found myself very lonely in Johannesburg in a meeting of the knowledge network on health system in the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, because I was the only GP in the midst of a lot of people, all expert in health economics and health systems and so on. And I said very, very quietly, maybe it would be interesting to look at the difference primary care can make in addressing social determinants, and maybe there is a role for general practitioners also to play there. And I looked for a working group, but it was a working group of one person. All the system people were making big graphs about and economic calculations about social determinants of health. So you see the whole working group on primary care here active in writing up the draft for a contribution. But we continued, we were granted $5,000, and so we made this document, Primary Healthcare as a Strategy for Achieving Equitable Care, where we try to find out how structural determinants that influence social stratification lead to differential vulnerability and exposure, and finally to health inequality. And that's, of course, what we know as family doctors, general practitioners, and primary care workers. We see those people with their differential vulnerability, and we try to find ways to reach them. They come to us, or we reach out to them, as we already discussed this morning in our different strategies. And we do that more and more in a team where we play a role as general practitioner. And as we discussed also in different contributions, we can't do that without involving the other networks, without thinking about education. Look at the statistics that were presented by the people from Manchester, at work, at economy, at housing. And so as a general practitioner, we are very well placed in this interprofessional team to address those different domains in order to give impulses for empowerment and to motivate at the group level people for more social cohesion. We continuously interact, and I think this conference demonstrated a lot of very good examples. And of course, we do that not alone. Civil society organizations are involved as well. But apart from that, we have always also a specific possibility, and that's COPC, Community-Oriented Primary Care, where we look at a community, we make a community diagnosis, and of course in primary care we have the data, that can be used to see what happens in a community, and we can contribute to that with other disciplines and other actors. We develop interventions in an intersectoral way, and we try to influence the social determinants and the living conditions. And I think that those two fields of activity, on the one hand, are direct interaction with people in their context, and on the other hand, the strategic approach of our information in order to make change happen, today consists in the concept of what social medicine can mean for general practitioners. And so we can make a difference and try to close the gap in a generation. I can inform you that finally the paper that we wrote was also integrated in the final report, and there was a strong plea by the Commission on the leadership of Sir Michael Marmot to really invest in strengthening primary care as a strategy to address the social determinants of health. What can general practitioners using the strategy of community-oriented primary care do for health in their daily practice? Once more, we have many good examples, but let me go back to history. It was already in the 1940s that Sidney and Emily Clark in the Polera community in South Africa started to make a community diagnosis. They looked at the data of their population, they linked that to living conditions, to the food and the access that they had to food and so on, and they described what the upstream causes were of what the social determinants were and what their impact was on morbidity and mortality in the local community. And later on, that has been the scientific basis for research, and it has been shown at community level clear possibilities for engagement in addressing social determinants. It has been also the forerunner of the ideas of district health systems and primary health care, and it conceptually started with the concept of the health center. And finally, it has influenced health systems reform, and also the Alma Ata and the primary healthcare movement have been influenced by this approach. And for sure, Julian Tudor Hart also used this approach and saw the role of the general practitioner as somebody who's got a continuous photograph of what the needs of the community are and can give a response at the level of the community, at the level of the families and the individuals to deal with the issues that matter. And when we work as general practitioner in our daily consultations, we just have to open our eyes and to see what happens. In the mid-80s, we saw in our community health center problematic physical condition of the youngsters. And we looked at the children's physical condition. We did a survey, and the children were 2 times longer in front of television and video games in those days and had less physical activity compared to the Flemish youngsters. So we brought all stakeholders together, the youth organizations, the parents, the schools, and so on, and the community diagnosis was not difficult. There were no playgrounds. We live with 10,000 people on 1 square kilometer, and there were no playgrounds at all. So what we did was not prescription of vitamins or prescription of physiotherapy, that was not what mattered, but construction of playgrounds. So we took with a group of volunteers and we changed the infrastructure on a local terrain that we had from the city, and we started to construct a playground. We organized activities from the community health center on, and the evaluation was very interesting. The first thing that came out of the evaluation was that the police reported less street criminality during the holiday period. That was not an outcome we intended for, but it happened. Increased social cohesion between the different communities. In those days, Moroccan and Turkish communities came into the traditional Belgian community there, and the children mixed up and the parents mixed up, and increased physical activity. I have to say that nowadays we have 7 of these playgrounds. The initiative has been taken over by the city, and it's still ongoing today, and very important. What we learned from this experience is the importance of these partnerships between policymakers, health managers, communities, academic institutions, and the health professions in order to build health systems that are based on patients' and persons' need. I will now walk through some examples at different levels. Of course, we start always in our practice from the nano level, the interaction with the individual patient. Then you have the micro level, and then you have the meso level, or communities, and then, of course, the policy and the macro levels. At the micro level, I think that general practice and primary healthcare workers are very strong in person and people-centered, goal-oriented care. Graham already mentioned the importance of starting from the goals of people. We wrote a Mackenzie lecture in 2011 about this topic, and we put that now into practice. But what we recognize is it is not easy, because people are not used to formulate their life goals. People ask, who is interested in what matters to me? Nobody ever asked me. And so we have really to start in a process to help people, to give them the voice and the possibility to formulate what really matters for them. And we are trying now to integrate this approach also in our records. And we just published a kind of concept where we make a new kind of patient record where you start from the life goals as the central issue. And we know that life goals have to do with aspirations, relationship, context, resources, health literacy, and so on. And then we add to that functional status information. We formulate objectives in order to achieve the goals, and of course that's a process of shared decision-making. We look at the health problems, we code them with International Classification of Primary Care, the medical diagnosis, and then we discuss with the patient how we are going to achieve the objectives. Objectives are very concrete. I want to go to walk out with my grandchildren. I want to play cards with my neighbors 2 times a week. So we look then at tools and barriers and facilitators. Of course, we implement medical knowledge when it is appropriate. We come to action plans with tasks and targets. And finally, we look over time how this can be achieved. And I think that in that direction, we should reorganize our electronic records, starting from the goals to make them more relevant to patient care, and do that in an interprofessional possibility. Of course, as GPs, we are also very strong in facilitating the access, and I always use this slide, which is about the C words. Commitment and connectedness, I think that's really a characteristic of what we as GPs and primary care workers do. Our clinical competence is important. We make context a very essential element in our daily practice and our diagnostic thinking. Comprehensive